The Werewolf. My father was not born or originally a resident in the Harz Mountains. He was the serf of an Hungarian nobleman of great possessions in Transylvania, but although a serf, he was not by any means a poor or illiterate man. In fact, he was rich, and his intelligence and respectability were such that he had been raised by his lord to the stewardship. But whoever may happen to be born a serf must he remain, even though he become a wealthy man. Such was the condition of my father. My father had been married for about 5 years, and by his marriage had 3 children, my eldest brother Caesar, myself Hermann, and a sister named Marcella. Latin is still the language spoken in that country, and that will account for our high-sounding names. My mother was a very beautiful woman, unfortunately more beautiful than virtuous. She was seen and admired by the lord of the soil. My father was sent away upon some mission, and during his absence my mother, flattered by the attentions and won by the assiduities of this nobleman, yielded to his wishes. It so happened that my father returned very unexpectedly, and discovered the intrigue. The evidence of my mother's shame was positive. He surprised her in the company of her seducer. Carried away by the impetuosity of his feelings, he watched the opportunity of a meeting taking place between them, and murdered both his wife and her seducer. Conscious that, as a serf, not even the provocation which he had received would be allowed as a justification of his conduct, he hastily collected together what money he could lay his hands upon, and, as we were then in the depth of winter, he put his horses to the sleigh, and taking his children with him, he set off in the middle of the night, and was far away before the tragical circumstance had transpired. Aware that he would be pursued, and that he had no chance of escape if he remained in any portion of his native country in which the authorities could lay hold of him, he continued his flight without intermission until he had buried himself in the intricacies and seclusion of the Harz Mountains. Of course, all that I have now told you I learned afterwards. My oldest recollections are knit to a rude yet comfortable cottage in which I lived with my father, brother, and sister. It was on the confines of one of those vast forests which cover the northern part of Germany. Around it were a few acres of ground, which during the summer months my father cultivated, and which, though they yielded a doubtful harvest, were sufficient for our support. In the winter we remained much indoors, for, as my father followed the chase, we were left alone, and the wolves during the season incessantly prowled about. My father had purchased the cottage and land about it of one of the rude foresters, who gained their livelihood partly by hunting and partly by burning charcoal for the purpose of smelting the ore from the neighboring mines. It was distant about 2 miles from any other habitation. I can call to mind the whole landscape now, the tall pines which rose up on the mountain above us, and the wide expanse of forest beneath, on the topmost boughs and heads of whose trees we looked down from our cottage as the mountain below us rapidly descended into the distant valley. In summertime the prospect was beautiful, but during the severe winter a more desolate scene could not well be imagined. I said that in the winter my father occupied himself with the chase. Every day he left us, and often would he lock the door that we might not leave the cottage. He had no one to assist him or to take care of us. Indeed, it was not easy to find a female servant who would live in such a solitude. But could he have found one, my father would not have received her, for he had imbibed a horror of the sex, as a difference of his conduct toward us, his 2 boys, and my poor little sister Marcella evidently proved. You may suppose we were sadly neglected. Indeed, we suffered much, for my father, fearful that we might come to some harm, would not allow us fuel when he left the cottage, and we were obliged, therefore, to creep under the heaps of bear's skin, and there to keep ourselves as warm as we could until he returned in the evening, when a blazing fire was our delight. That my father chose this restless sort of life may appear strange, but the fact was that he could not remain quiet. Whether from remorse for having committed murder, or from the misery consequent on his change of situation, or from both combined, he was never happy unless he was in a state of activity. Children, however, when left much to themselves, acquire a thoughtfulness not common to their age. So it was with us. And during the short, cold days of winter we would sit silent, longing for the happy hours when the snow would melt, and the leaves burst out, and the birds begin their songs, and when we should again be set at liberty. Such was our peculiar and savage sort of life until my brother Caesar was 9, myself 7, and my sister 5 years old, when the circumstances occurred on which is based the extraordinary narrative which I am about to relate. One evening my father returned home rather later than usual. He had been unsuccessful, and as the weather was very severe and many feet of snow were upon the ground, he was not only very cold but in a very bad humor. He had brought in wood, and we were all 3 of us gladly assisting each other in blowing on the embers to create the blaze, when he caught poor little Marcella by the arm and threw her aside. The child fell, struck her mouth, and bled very much. My brother ran to raise her up. Accustomed to ill usage and afraid of my father, she did not dare to cry, but looked up in his face very piteously. My father drew his stool near to the hearth, muttered something in abuse of women, and busied himself with a fire, which both my brother and I had deserted when our sister was so unkindly treated. A cheerful blaze was soon the result of his exertions, but we did not, as usual, crowd round it. Marcella, still bleeding, retired to a corner, and my brother and I took our seats beside her, while my father hung over the fire gloomily and alone. Such had been our position for about half an hour when the howl of a wolf close under the window of the cottage fell on our ears. My father started up and seized his gun. The howl was repeated. He examined the priming and then hastily left the cottage, shutting the door after him. We all waited, anxiously listening, for we thought that if he succeeded in shooting the wolf, he would return in a better humor, and although he was harsh to all of us, and particularly so to our little sister, still we loved our father, and loved to see him cheerful and happy, for what else had we to look up to? And I may here observe that perhaps there never were 3 children who were fonder of each other. We did not, like other children, fight and dispute together, and if by chance any disagreement did arise between my elder brother and me, little Marcella would run to us, and kissing us both, seal through her entreaties the peace between us. Marcella was a lovely, amiable child. I can recall her beautiful features even now. Alas, poor little Marcella. We waited for some time, but the report of the gun did not reach us, and my elder brother then said, "Our father has followed the wolf, and will not be back for some time. Marcella, let us wash the blood from your mouth, and then we will leave this corner and go to the fire and warm ourselves." We did so, and remained there until near midnight, every minute wondering, as it grew later, why our father did not return. We had no idea that he was in any danger, but we thought that he must have chased the wolf for a very long time. "I will look out and see if father is coming," said my brother Caesar, going to the door. "Take care," said Marcella. "The wolves must be about now, and we cannot kill them, brother." My brother opened the door very cautiously, and but a few inches. He peeped out. "I see nothing," said he after a time, and once more he joined us at the fire. "We have had no supper," said I, for my father usually cooked the meat as soon as he came home, and during his absence we had nothing but the fragments of the preceding day. "And if our father comes home after his hunt, Caesar," said Marcella, "he will be pleased to have some supper. Let us cook it for him and for ourselves." Caesar climbed upon the stool and reached down some meat. I forget now whether it was venison or bear's meat, but we cut off the usual quantity and proceeded to dress it, as we used to do under our father's superintendence. We were all busied putting it into the platters before the fire to wait his coming, when we heard the sound of a horn. We listened. There was a sound outside, and a minute afterwards my father entered, ushering in a young female and a large dark man in a hunter's dress. Perhaps I had better now relate what was only known to me many years afterwards. When my father had left the cottage, he perceived a large white wolf about 30 yards from him, As soon as the animal saw my father, it retreated slowly, growling and snarling. My father followed. The animal did not run, but always kept at some distance, and my father did not like to fire until he was pretty certain that his ball would take effect. Thus they went on for some time, the wolf now leaving my father far behind, and then stopping and snarling defiance at him, and then again, on his approach, setting off at speed. Anxious to shoot the animal, for the white wolf is very rare, my father continued the pursuit for several hours, during which he continually ascended the mountain. You must know that there are peculiar spots on those mountains which are supposed, and, as my story will prove, truly supposed, to be inhabited by the evil influences. They are well known to the huntsmen, who invariably avoid them. Now one of these spots, an open space in the pine forest above us, had been pointed out to my father as dangerous on that account. But whether he disbelieved these wild stories, or whether in his eager pursuit of the chase he disregarded them, I know not. Certain, however, it is that he was decoyed by the white wolf to this open space, when the animal appeared to slacken her speed. My father approached, came close up to her, raised his gun to his shoulder, and was about to fire when the wolf suddenly disappeared. He thought that the snow on the ground must have dazzled his sight, and he let down his gun to look for the beast, but she was gone. How she could have escaped over the clearance without his seeing her was beyond his comprehension. Mortified at the ill success of his chase, he was about to retrace his steps when he heard the distant sound of a horn. Astonishment at such a sound, at such an hour, in such a wilderness, made him forget for the moment his disappointment, and he remained riveted to the spot. In a minute the horn was blown a second time, and at no great distance. My father stood still and listened. A third time it was blown. I forget the term used to express it, but it was the signal which my father well knew implied that the party was lost in the woods. In a few minutes more my father beheld a man on horseback, with a female seated on the crupper, enter the cleared space, and ride up to him. At first my father called to mind the strange stories which he had heard of the supernatural beings who were said to frequent these mountains, but the near approach of the parties satisfied him that they were mortals like himself. As soon as they came up to him, the man who guided the horse accosted him. "Friend Hunter, you are out late. The better fortune for us. We have ridden far and are in fear of our lives, which are eagerly sought after. These mountains have enabled us to elude our pursuers, but if we find not shelter and refreshment, that will avail us little, as we must perish from hunger and the inclemency of the night. My daughter, who rides behind me, is now more dead than alive. Say, can you assist us in our difficulty?" "My cottage is some few miles distant," replied my father, "but I have little to offer you besides a shelter from the weather. To the little I have you are welcome. May I ask whence you come?" "Yes, friend, it is no secret now. We have escaped from Transylvania, where my daughter's honor and my life were equally in jeopardy." This information was quite enough to raise an interest in my father's heart. He remembered his own escape. He remembered the loss of his wife's honor and the tragedy by which it was wound up. He immediately and warmly offered all the assistance which he could afford them. "There is no time to be lost, then, good sir," observed the horseman. "My daughter is chilled with the frost, and cannot hold out much longer against the severity of the weather." "Follow me," replied my father, leading the way towards his home. "I was lured away in pursuit of a large white wolf," observed my father. "It came to the very window of my hut, or I should not have been out at this time of night." "The creature passed by us just as we came out of the wood," said the female in a silvery tone. "I was nearly discharging my piece at it," observed the hunter, "but since it did us such good service, I am glad that I allowed it to escape." In about an hour and a half, during which my father walked at a rapid pace, the party arrived at the cottage, and, as I said before, came in. "We are in good time, apparently," observed the dark hunter, catching the smell of the roasted meat as he walked to the fire and surveyed my brother and sister and myself. "You have young cooks here, mynheer." "I am glad that we shall not have to wait," replied my father. "Come, mistress, seat yourself by the fire. You require warmth after your cold ride." "And where can I put up my horse, mynheer?" observed the huntsman. "I will take care of him," replied my father, going out to the cottage door. The female must, however, be particularly described. She was young, and apparently 20 years of age. She was dressed in a traveling dress, deeply bordered with white fur, and wore a cap of white ermine on her head. Her features were very beautiful, at least I thought so, and so my father has since declared. Her hair was flaxen, glossy and shining, and bright as a mirror, and her mouth, although somewhat large when it was open, showed the most brilliant teeth I have ever beheld. But there was something about her eyes, bright as they were, which made us children afraid. They were so restless, so furtive. I could not at that time tell why, but I felt as if there was cruelty in her eye, and when she beckoned us to come to her, we approached her with fear and trembling. Still she was beautiful, very beautiful. She spoke kindly to my brother and myself, patted our heads and caressed us, but Marcella would not come near her. On the contrary, she slunk away and hid herself in the bed, and would not wait for the supper, which half an hour before she had been so anxious for. My father, having put the horse into a closed shed, soon returned, and supper was placed upon the table. When it was over, my father requested that the young lady would take possession of his bed, and he would remain at the fire, and sit up with her father. After some hesitation on her part, this arrangement was agreed to, and I and my brother crept into the other bed with Marcella, for we had as yet always slept together. But we could not sleep. There was something so unusual, not only in seeing strange people, but in having those people sleep at the cottage, that we were bewildered. As for poor little Marcella, she was quiet, but I perceived that she trembled during the whole night, and sometimes I thought that she was checking a sob. My father had brought out some spirits, which he rarely used, and he and the strange hunter remained drinking and talking before the fire. Our ears were ready to catch the slightest whisper, so much was our curiosity excited. "You said you came from Transylvania," observed my father. "Even so, mynheer," replied the hunter. "I was a serf to the noble house of __. My master would insist upon my surrendering up my fair girl to his wishes. It ended in my giving him a few inches of my hunting knife." "We are countrymen and brothers in misfortune," replied my father, taking the huntsman's hand and pressing it warmly. "Indeed, are you, then, from that country?" "Yes, and I too have fled for my life, but mine is a melancholy tale." "Your name?" inquired the hunter. "Krantz." "What, Krantz of __? I have heard of your tale. You need not renew your grief by repeating it now." "Welcome, most welcome, mynheer, and I may say my worthy kinsman. I am your second cousin, Wilfred of Barnsdorf," cried the hunter, rising up and embracing my father. They filled their horn mugs to the brim, and drank to one another after the German fashion. The conversation was then carried on in a low tone. All that we could collect from it was, that our new relative and his daughter were to take up their abode in our cottage, at least for the present. In about an hour they both fell back in their chairs, and appeared to sleep. "Marcella, dear, did you hear?" said my brother in a low tone. "Yes," replied Marcella in a whisper. "I heard all. Oh, brother, I cannot bear to look upon that woman. I feel so frightened." My brother made no reply, and shortly afterwards we were all three fast asleep. When we woke the next morning, we found that the hunter's daughter had risen before us. I thought she looked more beautiful than ever. She came up to little Marcella and caressed her. The child burst into tears and sobbed as if her heart would break. But, not to detain you with too long a story, the huntsman and his daughter were accommodated in the cottage. My father and he went out hunting daily, leaving Christina with us. She performed all the household duties, was very kindly to us children, and gradually the dislike even of little Marcella wore away. But a great change took place in my father. He appeared to have conquered his aversion to the sex, and was most attentive to Christina. Often, after her father and we were in bed, would he sit up with her, conversing in a low tone by the fire. I ought to have mentioned that my father and the huntsman Wilfred slept in another portion of the cottage, and that the bed which he formerly occupied, and which was in the same room as ours, had been given up to the use of Christina. These visitors had been about 3 weeks at the cottage, when, one night, after we children had been sent to bed, a consultation was held. My father had asked Christina in marriage, and had obtained both her own consent and that of Wilfred. After this, a conversation took place, which was as nearly as I can recollect as follows. You may take my child, Mynheer Krantz, and my blessing with her, and I shall then leave you and seek some other habitation, it matters little where. Why not remain here, Wilfred? No, no, I am called elsewhere. Let that suffice, and ask no more questions. You have my child. I thank you for her, and will duly value her, but there is one difficulty. I know what you would say. There is no priest here in this wild country. True, neither is there any law to bind. Still must some ceremony pass between you to satisfy a father. Will you consent to marry her after my fashion? If so, I will marry you directly. I will, replied my father. Then take her by the hand. Now, Mynheer, swear. I swear, repeated my father. By all the spirits of the Harz mountains. Nay, why not by heaven? Interrupted my father. Because it is not my humour, rejoined Wilfred. If I prefer that oath, less binding perhaps than another, surely you will not thwart me? Well, be it so then. Have your humour. Will you make me swear by that in which I do not believe? Yet many do so, who in outward appearance are Christians, rejoined Wilfred. Say, will you be married, or shall I take my daughter away with me? Proceed, replied my father impatiently. I swear by all the spirits of the Harz mountains, by all their power for good or for evil, that I take Christina for my wedded wife, that I will ever protect her, cherish her, and love her, that my hand shall never be raised against her to harm her. My father repeated the words after Wilfred. And if I fail in this my vow, may all the vengeance of the spirits fall upon me and upon my children. May they perish by the vulture, by the wolf, or other beasts of the forest. May their flesh be torn from their limbs, and their bones blanch in the wilderness. All this I swear. My father hesitated as he repeated the last words. Little Marcella could not restrain herself, and as my father repeated the last sentence, she burst into tears. This sudden interruption appeared to discompose the party, particularly my father. He spoke harshly to the child, who controlled her sobs, burying her face under the bedclothes. Such was the second marriage of my father. The next morning the hunter Wilfred mounted his horse and rode away. My father resumed his bed, which was in the same room as ours, and things went on much as before the marriage, except that our new mother-in-law did not show any kindness towards us. Indeed, during my father's absence, she would often beat us, particularly little Marcella, and her eyes would flash fire as she looked eagerly upon the fair and lovely child. One night my sister awoke me and my brother. "What is the matter?" said Caesar. "She has gone out," whispered Marcella. "Gone out?" "Yes, gone out at the door in her night-clothes," replied the child. "I saw her get out of bed, look at my father to see if he slept, and then she went out at the door." What could induce her to leave her bed, and all undressed to go out in such bitter wintry weather, with snow deep on the ground, was to us incomprehensible. We lay awake, and in about an hour we heard the growl of a wolf close under the window. "There's a wolf," said Caesar. "She will be torn to pieces." "Oh, no," cried Marcella. In a few minutes afterwards our mother-in-law appeared. She was in her night-dress, as Marcella had stated. She let down the latch of the door so as to make no noise, went to a pail of water, and washed her face and hands, and then slipped into the bed where my father lay. We all three trembled. We hardly knew why, but we resolved to watch the next night. We did so. And not only on the ensuing night, but on many others, and always at about the same hour would our mother-in-law rise from her bed and leave the cottage, and after she was gone, we invariably heard the growl of a wolf under our window, and always saw her on her return wash herself before she retired to bed. We observed also that she seldom sat down to meals, and that when she did, she appeared to eat with dislike. But when the meat was taken down to be prepared for dinner, she would often furtively put a raw piece into her mouth. My brother Caesar was a courageous boy. He did not like to speak to my father until he knew more. He resolved that he would follow her out and ascertain what she did. Marcella and I endeavored to dissuade him from this project, but he would not be controlled. And the very next night he lay down in his clothes, and as soon as our mother-in-law had left the cottage, he jumped up, took down my father's gun, and followed her. You may imagine in what a state of suspense Marcella and I remained during his absence. After a few minutes we heard the report of a gun. It did not awaken my father, and we lay trembling with anxiety. In a minute afterwards we saw our mother-in-law enter the cottage. Her dress was bloody. I put my hand to Marcella's mouth to prevent her crying out, although I was myself in great alarm. Our mother-in-law approached my father's bed, looked to see if he was asleep, and then went to the chimney and blew up the embers into a blaze. "Who is there?" said my father, waking up. "Lie still, dearest," replied my mother-in-law. "It is only me. I have lighted the fire to warm some water. I am not quite well." My father turned round and was soon asleep, but we watched our mother-in-law. She changed her linen and threw the garments she had worn into the fire, and we then perceived that her right leg was bleeding profusely, as if from a gunshot wound. She bandaged it up, and then dressing herself, remained before the fire until the break of day. Poor little Marcella! Her heart beat quick as she pressed me to her side. So indeed did mine. Where was our brother Caesar? How did my mother-in-law receive the wound unless from his gun? At last my father rose, and then, for the first time, I spoke, saying, "Father, where's my brother Caesar?" "Your brother?" explained he. "Why, where can he be?" "Merciful heaven! I thought as I lay restless last night," observed our mother-in-law, "that I heard somebody open the latch of the door. And, dear me, husband, what has become of your gun?" My father cast his eyes above the chimney, and perceived that his gun was missing. For a moment he looked perplexed. Then, seizing a broad axe, he went out of the cottage without saying another word. He did not remain away from us long. In a few minutes he returned, bearing in his arms the mangled body of my poor brother. He laid it down and covered up his face. My mother-in-law rose up and looked at the body, while Marcella and I threw ourselves by its side, wailing and sobbing bitterly. "Go to bed again, children," said she sharply. "Husband," continued she, "your boy must have taken the gun down to shoot a wolf, and the animal has been too powerful for him. Poor boy, he has paid dearly for his rashness." My father made no reply. I wished to speak, to tell all, but Marcella, who perceived my intention, held me by the arm and looked at me so imploringly that I desisted. My father, therefore, was left in his error, but Marcella and I, although we could not comprehend it, were conscious that our mother-in-law was in some way connected with my brother's death. That day my father went out and dug a grave, and when he laid the body in the earth, he piled up stones over it, so that the wolves should not be able to dig it up. The shock of this catastrophe was to my poor father very severe. For several days he never went to the chase, although at times he would utter bitter anathemas and vengeance against the wolves. But during this time of mourning on his part, my mother-in-law's nocturnal wanderings continued with the same regularity as before. At last my father took down his gun to repair to the forest, but he soon returned and appeared much annoyed. "Would you believe it, Christina, that the wolves, perdition to the whole race, have actually contrived to dig up the body of my poor boy? Now there is nothing left of him but his bones." "Indeed," replied my mother-in-law. Marcella looked at me, and I saw in her intelligent eye all that she would have uttered. "A wolf growls under our window every night, father," said I. "Aye, indeed. Why did you not tell me, boy? Wake me the next time you hear it." I saw my mother-in-law turn away. Her eyes flashed fire, and she gnashed her teeth. My father went out again and covered up with a large pile of stones the little remnants of my poor brother which the wolves had spared. Such was the first act of the tragedy. The spring now came on, the snow disappeared, and we were permitted to leave the cottage, but never would I quit for one moment my dear little sister, to whom, since the death of my brother, I was more ardently attached than ever. Indeed, I was afraid to leave her alone with my mother-in-law, who appeared to have a particular pleasure in ill-treating the child. My father was now employed upon his little farm, and I was able to render him some assistance. Marcella used to sit by us while we were at work, leaving my mother-in-law alone in the cottage. I ought to observe that, as the spring advanced, so did my mother decrease her nocturnal rambles, and that we never heard the growl of the wolf under the window after I had spoken of it to my father. One day, when my father and I were in the field, Marcella being with us, my mother-in-law came out, saying that she was going into the forest to collect some herbs my father wanted, and that Marcella must go to the cottage and watch the dinner. Marcella went, and my mother-in-law soon disappeared in the forest, taking a direction quite contrary to that in which the cottage stood, and leaving my father and I, as it were, between her and Marcella. About an hour afterwards we were startled by shrieks from the cottage, evidently the shrieks of little Marcella. "Marcella has burnt herself, father," said I, throwing down my spade. My father threw down his, and we both hastened to the cottage. Before we could gain the door, out darted a large white wolf, which fled with the utmost celerity. My father had no weapon. He rushed into the cottage, and there saw poor little Marcella expiring. Her body was dreadfully mangled, and the blood pouring from it had formed a large pool on the cottage floor. My father's first intention had been to seize his gun and pursue, but he was checked by this horrid spectacle. He knelt down by his dying child and burst into tears. Marcella could just look kindly on us for a few seconds, and then her eyes were closed in death. My father and I were still hanging over my poor sister's body when my mother-in-law came in. At the dreadful sight she expressed much concern, but she did not appear to recoil from the sight of blood, as most women do. "Poor child," said she, "it must have been that great white wolf which passed me just now, and frightened me so. She's quite dead, Krantz." I know it," cried my father in agony. I thought my father would never recover from the effects of this second tragedy. He mourned bitterly over the body of his sweet child, and for several days would not consign it to its grave, although frequently requested by my mother-in-law to do so. At last he yielded, and dug a grave for her close by that of my poor brother, and took every precaution that the wolves should not violate her remains. I was now really miserable as I lay alone in the bed which I had formerly shared with my brother and sister. I could not help thinking that my mother-in-law was implicated in both their deaths, although I could not account for the manner. But I no longer felt afraid of her. My little heart was full of hatred and revenge. The night after my sister had been buried, as I lay awake, I perceived my mother-in-law get up and go out of the cottage. I waited for some time, then dressed myself and looked out through the door, which I half opened. The moon shone bright, and I could see the spot where my brother and my sister had been buried, and what was my horror when I perceived my mother-in-law busily removing the stones from Marcella's grave. She was in her white night-dress, and the moon shone full upon her face. She was digging with her hands and throwing away the stones behind her with all the ferocity of a wild beast. It was some time before I could collect my senses and decide what I should do. At last I perceived that she had arrived at the body and raised it up to the side of the grave. I could bear it no longer. I ran to my father and awoke him. "Father, father," cried I, "dress yourself and get your gun." "What?" cried my father. "The wolves are there, are they?" He jumped out of bed, threw on his clothes, and in his anxiety did not appear to perceive the absence of his wife. As soon as he was ready, I opened the door. He went out, and I followed him. Imagine his horror when, unprepared as he was for such a sight, he beheld, as he advanced towards the grave, not a wolf, but his wife, in her night-dress, on her hands and knees, crouching by the body of my sister, and tearing off large pieces of the flesh, and devouring them with all the avidity of a wolf. She was too busy to be aware of our approach. My father dropped his gun. His hair stood on end, so did mine. He breathed heavily, and then his breath for a time stopped. I picked up the gun and put it into his hand. Suddenly he appeared as if concentrated rage had restored him to double vigor. He leveled his piece, fired, and with a loud shriek, down fell the wretch whom he had fostered in his bosom. God of heaven, cried my father, sinking down upon the earth in a swoon as soon as he had discharged his gun. I remained some time by his side before he recovered. Where am I? Said he. What has happened? Oh, yes, I recollect now. Heaven forgive me. He rose, and we walked up to the grave. What again was our astonishment and horror to find that instead of the dead body of my mother-in-law, as we had expected, there was lying over the remains of my poor sister a large white she-wolf. The white wolf, exclaimed my father, the white wolf which decoyed me into the forest. I see it all now. I have dealt with the spirits of the Hartz Mountains. For some time my father remained in silence and deep thought. He then carefully lifted up the body of my sister, replaced it in the grave, and covered it over as before, having struck the head of the dead animal with the heel of his boot, and raving like a madman. He walked back to the cottage, shut the door, and threw himself on the bed. I did the same, for I was in a stupor of amazement. Early in the morning we were both roused by a loud knocking at the door, and in rushed the hunter Wilfred. My daughter, man, my daughter, where is my daughter? Cried he in a rage. Where the wretch, the fiend, should be, I trust, replied my father, starting up and displaying equal choler. Where she should be, in hell. Leave this cottage, or you may fare worse. Ha, ha, replied the hunter. Would you harm a potent spirit of the Hartz Mountains? Poor mortal, who must needs wed a werewolf. Out, demon, I defy thee in thy power. Yet shall you feel it. Remember your oath, your solemn oath, never to raise your hand against her to harm her. I made no compact with evil spirits. You did. And if you failed in your vow, you were to meet the vengeance of the spirits. Your children were to perish by the vulture, the wolf. Out, out, demon, and their bones blanch in the wilderness. Ha, ha! My father, frantic with rage, seized his axe and raised it over Wilfred's head to strike. All this I swear, continued the huntsman mockingly. The axe descended, but it passed through the form of the hunter, and my father lost his balance and fell heavily on the floor. Mortal, said the hunter, striding over my father's body, we have power over those only who have committed murder. You have been guilty of a double murder. You shall pay the penalty attached to your marriage vow. 2 of your children are gone. The 3rd is yet to follow, and follow them he will, for your oath is registered. Go. It were kindness to kill thee. Your punishment is that you live.
Kish, son of Kish, by Jack London. Thus will I give 6 blankets, warm and double, 6 files, large and hard, 6 Hudson Bay knives, keen-edged and long, 2 canoes, the work of Mogum, the maker of things, 10 dogs, heavy-shouldered and strong in the harness, and 3 guns. The trigger of one be broken, but it is a good gun, and can doubtless be mended. Kish paused, and swept his eyes over the circle of intent faces. It was the time of the great fishing, and he was bidding to Nob for Susu, his daughter. The place was the St. George Mission by the Yukon, and the tribes had gathered for many 100 miles. From north, south, east, and west they had come, even from Tozakakat and far Tanana. And further, O Nob, thou art chief of the Tanana, and I, Kish, the son of Kish, am chief of the Tlungit. Wherefore, when my seed springs from the loins of thy daughter, there shall be a friendship between the tribes, a great friendship, and Tanana and Tlungit shall be brothers of the blood in the time to come. What I have said I will do, that will I do. And how is it with you, O Nob, in this matter? Nob nodded his head gravely, his gnarled and age-twisted face inscrutably masking the soul that dwelt behind. His narrow eyes burned like twin coals through their narrow slits as he piped in a high-cracked voice, "But that is not all." "What, more?" Kish demanded. "Have I not offered full measure? Was there ever yet a Tanana maiden who fetched so great a price? Then name her." An open snicker passed around the circle, and Kish knew that he stood in shame before these people. "Nay, nay, good Kish, thou dost not understand." Nob made a soft, stroking gesture. "The price is fair. It is a good price, nor do I question the broken trigger. But that is not all. What of the man?" "Aye, what of the man?" the circle snarled. "It is said," Nob's shrill voice piped, "it is said that Kish does not walk in the way of his fathers. It is said that he has wandered into the dark after strange gods, and that he is become afraid." The face of Kish went dark. "It is a lie!" he thundered. "Kish is afraid of no man." "It is said," old Nob piped on, "that he has hearkened to the speech of the white man up at the big house, and that he bends head to the white man's God, and moreover, that blood is displeasing to the white man's God." Keesh dropped his eyes, and his hands clenched passionately. The savage circle laughed derisively, and in the ear of Nob whispered Madwan the shaman, high priest of the tribe and maker of medicine. The shaman poked among the shadows on the rim of the firelight, and roused up a slender young boy, whom he brought face to face with Keesh, and in the hand of Keesh he thrust a knife. Nob leaned forward. "Keesh, O Keesh, darest thou to kill a man? Behold, this is Kitsnu, a slave. Strike, O Keesh, strike with the strength of thy arm." The boy trembled and waited the stroke. Keesh looked at him, and thoughts of Mr. Brown's higher morality floated through his mind, and strong upon him was a vision of the leaping flames of Mr. Brown's particular brand of hellfire. The knife fell to the ground, and the boy sighed and went out beyond the firelight with shaking knees. At the feet of Nob sprawled a wolf dog, which bared its gleaming teeth and prepared to spring after the boy. But the shaman ground his foot into the brute's body, and so doing gave Nob an idea. "And then, O Kish, what wouldst thou do should a man do this thing to you?" As he spoke, Nob held a ribbon of salmon to White Fang, and when the animal attempted to take it, smote him sharply on the nose with a stick. "And afterward, O Kish, wouldst thou do thus?" White Fang was cringing back on his belly and fawning to the hand of Nob. "Listen!" Leaning on the arm of Madwan, Nob had risen to his feet. "I am very old, and because I am very old, I will tell thee things. Thy father, Kish, was a mighty man, and he did love the song of the bowstring and battle, and these eyes have beheld him cast a spear till the head stood out beyond a man's body. But thou art unlike. Since thou left the raven to worship the wolf, thou art become afraid of blood, and thou makest thy people afraid. This is not good. For behold, when I was a boy, even as Kitsnu here, there was no white man in all the land. But they came, one by one, these white men, till now they are many, and they are a restless breed, never content to rest by the fire with a full belly and let the morrow bring its own meat. A curse was laid upon them, it would seem, and they must work it out in toil and hardship." Kish was startled. A recollection of a hazy story told by Mr. Brown of one Adam of old time came to him, and it seemed that Mr. Brown had spoken true. "So they laid hands upon all they behold, these white men, and they go everywhere and behold all things, and ever do more follow in their footsteps, so that if nothing can be done, they will come to possess all the land, and there will be no room for the tribes of the raven. Wherefore it is meet that we fight with them till none are left. Then will we hold the passes and the land, and perhaps our children and our children's children shall flourish and grow fat. There is a great struggle to come when wolf and raven shall grapple. But Kish will not fight, nor will he let his people fight. So it is not well that he should take to him my daughter. Thus have I spoken, I Nob, chief of the Tanana." "But the white men are good and great," Kish made answer. "The white men have taught us many things. The white men have given us blankets and knives and guns, such as we have never made and never could make. I remember in what manner we lived before they came. I was unborn then, but I have it from my father. When we went on the hunt, we must creep so close to the moose that a spear cast would cover the distance. Today, we use the white man's rifle, and farther away than can a child's cry be heard. We ate fish and meat and berries. There was nothing else to eat. And we ate without salt. How many may there be among you who care to go back to the fish and meat without salt? It would have sunk home had not Mad One leaped to his feet ere silence could come. And first a question to thee, Kish. The white man up at the big house tells you that it is wrong to kill. Yet do we not know that the white men kill? Have we forgotten the great fight on the Koyukuk? Or the great fight at Nuklukyeto, where 3 white men killed 20 of the Tozakakats? Do you think we no longer remember the 3 men of the Tanana that the white man McElrath killed? Tell me, O Kish, why does the shaman Brown teach you that it is wrong to fight when all his brothers fight? Nay, nay, there is no need to answer, Nob piped, while Kish struggled with the paradox. It is very simple. The good man Brown would hold the raven tight, whilst his brothers plucked the feathers. He raised his voice. But so long as there is one Tanana to strike a blow, or one maiden to bear a man-child, the raven shall not be plucked. Nob turned to a husky young man across the fire. And what sayest thou, Makamuk, who art brother to Susu? Makamuk came to his feet. A long face scar lifted his upper lip into a perpetual grin, which belied the glowing ferocity of his eyes. This day, he began with cunning irrelevance, I came by the trader McElrath's cabin, and in the door I saw a child laughing at the sun, and the child looked at me with the trader McElrath's eyes, and it was frightened. The mother ran to it and quieted it. The mother was Ziska, the Tlungit woman. A snarl of rage rose up and drowned his voice, which he instilled by turning dramatically upon Kish with outstretched arm and accusing finger. So, you give your women away, you Tlungit, and come to the Tanana for more? But we have need of our women, Kish, for we must breed men, many men, against the day when the raven grapples with the wolf. Through the storm of applause Nob's voice shrilled clear. And thou, Nasabak, who art her favorite brother? The young man was slender and graceful, with the strong aquiline nose and high brows of his type. But from some nervous affliction the lid of one eye drooped at odd times in a suggestive wink. Even as he arose it drooped and rested a moment against his cheek. But it was not greeted with the accustomed laughter. Every face was grave. I, too, passed by the trader McElrath's cabin, he rippled in soft, girlish tones, and I saw Indians with the sweat running into their eyes and their knees shaking with weariness. I say, I saw Indians groaning under the logs from the store which the trader McElrath is to build, and with my eyes I saw them chopping wood to keep the shaman Brown's big house warm through the frost of the long nights. This be squaw work. Never shall the Tanana do that like. We shall be blood brothers to men, not squaws, and the Tlungit be squaws. A deep silence fell, and all eyes centered on Kish. He looked about him carefully, deliberately, full into the face of each grown man. So, he said passionlessly, and so, he repeated, then turned on his heel without further word and passed out into the darkness. Wading among sprawling babies and bristling wolf dogs, he threaded the great camp, and on its outskirts came upon a woman at work by the light of a fire. With strings of bark stripped from the long roots of creeping vines, she was braiding rope for the fishing. For some time, without speech, he watched her deft hands bringing law and order out of the unruly mass of curling fibers. She was good to look upon, swaying there to her task, strong-limbed, deep-chested and with hips made for motherhood, and the bronze of her face was golden in the flickering light, her hair blue-black, her eyes jet. "O Susu," he spoke finally, "thou hast looked upon me kindly in the days that have gone, and in the days yet young." "I looked kindly upon thee for that thou wert chief of the Tlungit," she answered quickly, "and because thou wert big and strong." "Aye, but that was in the old days of the fishing," she hastened to add, "before the shaman Brown came and taught thee ill things and led thy feet on strange trails. But I would tell thee—" She held up one hand in a gesture which reminded him of her father. "Nay, I know already the speech that stirs in thy throat, O Kish, and I make answer now. It so happeneth that the fish of the water and the beasts of the forest bring forth after their kind, and this is good. Likewise it happeneth to women. It is for them to bring forth their kind. And even the maiden, while she is yet a maiden, feels the pang of the birth, and the pain of the breast, and the small hands at the neck. And when such feeling is strong, then does each maiden look about her with secret eyes for the man who shall be fit to father her kind. So have I felt. So did I feel when I looked upon thee and found thee big and strong, a hunter and fighter of beasts and men, well able to win meat when I should eat for two, well able to keep danger afar off when my helplessness drew nigh. But that was before the day the shaman Brown came into the land and taught thee— But it is not right, Susu. I have it on good work. It is not right to kill. I know what thou wouldst say. Then breed thou after thy kind, the kind that does not kill. But come not on such quest among the Tanana. For it is said, in the time to come, that the raven shall grapple with the wolf. I do not know, for this be the affair of men, but I do know that it is for me to bring forth men against that time. Susu, Kish broke in, thou must hear me. A man would beat me with a stick and make me hear, she sneered. But thou, here. She thrust a bunch of bark into his hand. I cannot give thee myself, but this, yes, it looks fittest in thy hands. It is squaw work, so braid away. He flung it from him, the angry blood pounding a muddy path under his bronze. "One more thing," she went on. "There be an old custom which thy father and mine were not strangers to. When a man falls in battle, his scalp is to be carried away in token. Very good. But thou who have forsworn the raven must do more. Thou must bring me not scalps, but heads, 2 heads, and then will I give thee not bark, but a brave beaded belt, and sheath, and long Russian knife. Then will I look kindly upon thee once again, and all will be well." So the man pondered. So. Then he turned and passed out through the night. "Nay, O Kish," she called after him, "not 2 heads, but 3 at least." But Kish remained true to his conversion, lived uprightly, and made his tribe's people obey the gospel as propounded by Reverend Jackson Brown. Through all the time of the fishing he gave no heed to the Tanana, nor took notice of the sly things which were said, nor of the laughter of the women of the many tribes. After the fishing, Nob and his people, with great store of salmon, sun-dried and smoke-cured, departed for the hunting on the head-reaches of the Tanana. Kish watched them go, but did not fail in his attendance at mission service, where he prayed regularly and led the singing with his deep bass voice. The Reverend Jackson Brown delighted in that deep bass voice, and because of his sterling qualities deemed him the most promising convert. McElrath doubted this. He did not believe in the efficacy of the conversion of the heathen, and he was not slow in speaking his mind. But Mr. Brown was a large man in his way, and he argued it out with such convincingness all of one long fall night that the trader, driven from position after position, finally announced in desperation, "Knock out my brains with apples, Brown, if I don't become a convert myself if Kish holds fast, true blue, for 2 years." Mr. Brown never lost an opportunity, so he clinched the matter on the spot with a virile hand grip, and thenceforth the conduct of Kish was to determine the ultimate abiding place of McIlrath's soul. But there came news one day, after the winter rime had settled down over the land sufficiently for travel. A Tanana man arrived at the St. George Mission in quest of ammunition and bringing information that Susu had set eyes on Niku, a nervy young hunter who had bid brilliantly for her by old Nob's fire. It was at about this time that the Reverend Jackson Brown came upon Kish by the wood trail which leads down to the river. Kish had his best dogs in the harness, and shoved under the sled lashings was his largest and finest pair of snowshoes. "Where goest thou, O Kish? Hunting?" Mr. Brown asked, falling into the Indian manner. Kish looked him steadily in the eyes for a full minute, then started up his dogs, then again turning his deliberate gaze upon the missionary, he answered, "No, I go to hell." In an open space, striving to burrow into the snow as though for shelter from the appalling desolateness, huddled three dreary lodges. Ringed all about a dozen paces away was the sombre forest. Overhead there was no keen, blue sky of naked space, but a vague, misty curtain pregnant with snow, which had drawn between. There was no wind, no sound, nothing but the snow and silence. Nor was there even the gentle stir of life about the camp, for the hunting party had run upon the flank of the caribou herd, and the kill had been large. Thus, after the period of fasting, had come the plenitude of feasting, and thus in broad daylight they slept heavily under their roofs of moose hide. By a fire before one of the lodges 5 pairs of snowshoes stood on end in their element, and by the fire sat Susu. The hood of her squirrel-skin parka was about her hair and well drawn up around her neck, but her hands were unmittened and nimbly at work with needle and sinew, completing the last fantastic design on a belt of leather faced with bright scarlet cloth. A dog, somewhere at the rear of one of the lodges, raised a short, sharp bark, then ceased as abruptly as it had begun. Once her father in the lodge at her back gurgled and grunted in his sleep. Bad dream, she smiled to herself. He grows old, and that last joint was too much. She placed the last bead, knotted the sinew, and replenished the fire. Then, after gazing long into the flames, she lifted her head to the harsh crunch, crunch of a moccasined foot against the flinty snow granules. Kish was at her side, bending slightly forward to a load which he bore upon his back. This was wrapped loosely in a soft tanned moose hide, and he dropped it carelessly into the snow and sat down. They looked at each other long and without speech. "It is a far fetch, O Kish," she said at last, "a far fetch from St. George Mission by the Yukon." "Aye," he made answer absently, his eyes fixed keenly upon the belt and taking note of its girth. "But where's the knife?" he demanded. "Here." She drew it from inside her parka and flashed its naked length in the firelight. "It is a good knife." "Give it me," he commanded. "Nay, O Kish," she laughed. "It may be that thou wast not born to wear it." "Give it to me," he reiterated without change of tone. "I was so born." But her eyes, glancing coquettishly past him to the moose hide, saw the snow about it slowly reddening. "It is blood, Kish?" she asked. "Aye, it is blood. But give me the belt and the long Russian knife." She felt suddenly afraid but thrilled when he took the belt roughly from her. Thrilled to the roughness, she looked at him softly, and aware of a pain at the breast and of small hands clutching her throat. "It was made for a smaller man," he remarked grimly, drawing in his abdomen and clasping the buckle at the first hole. Susu smiled, and her eyes were yet softer. Again she felt the soft hands at her throat. He was good to look upon, and the belt was indeed small, made for a smaller man. But what did it matter? She could make many belts. "But the blood?" she asked, urged on by a hope new-born and growing. "The blood, Kish, are they heads?" "Aye." "They must be very fresh, else would the blood be frozen." Ay, it is not cold, and they be fresh, quite fresh. Oh, Kish! Her face was warm and bright. And for me? Ay, for thee. He took hold of a corner of the hide, flirted it open, and rolled the heads out before her. 3, he whispered savagely. Nay, 4 at least. But she sat transfixed. There they lay, the soft-featured Niku, the gnarled old face of Nob, Makamuk grinning at her with his lifted upper lip, and lastly Nosabok, his eyelid, up to its old trick, drooped on his girlish cheek in a suggestive wink. There they lay, the firelight flashing upon and playing over them, and from each of them a widening circle dyed the snow to scarlet. Thawed by the fire, the white crust gave way beneath the head of Nob, which rolled over like a thing alive, spun around, and came to rest at her feet. But she did not move. Kish too sat motionless, his eyes unblinking, centered steadfastly upon her. Once, in the forest, an overburdened pine dropped its load of snow, and the echoes reverberated hollowly down the gorge. But neither stirred. The short day had been waning fast, and darkness was wrapping round the camp when White Fang trotted up toward the fire. He paused to reconnoiter, but not being driven back, came closer. His nose shot swiftly to the side, nostrils a-tremble and bristles rising along the spine, and straight and true he followed the sudden scent to his master's head. He sniffed it gingerly at first, and licked the forehead with his red, lolling tongue. Then he sat abruptly down, pointed his nose up at the first faint star, and raised the long wolf howl. This brought Susu to herself. She glanced across at Kish, who had unsheathed the Russian knife and was watching her intently. His face was firm and set, and in it she read the law. Slipping back the hood of her parka, she bared her neck and rose to her feet. There she paused and took a long look about her at the rimming forest, at the faint stars in the sky, at the camp, at the snowshoes in the snow, a last, long, comprehensive look at life. A light breeze stirred her hair from the side, and for the space of one deep breath she turned her head and followed it around until she met it full-faced. Then she thought of her children, ever to be unborn, and she walked over to Kish and said,
Perdita by Hildegard Hawthorne. Alfalfa Ranch, low, wide, with spreading verandas, all overgrown by roses and woodbine, and commanding on all sides a wide view of the rolling alfalfa fields, was a most bewitching place for a young couple to spend the first few months of their married life. So Jack and I were naturally much delighted when Aunt Agnes asked us to consider it our own for as long as we chose. The ranch, in spite of its distance from the nearest town, surrounded as it was by the prairies, and without a neighbor within a 3-mile radius, was yet luxuriously fitted with all the modern conveniences. Aunt Agnes was a rich young widow, and had built the place after her husband's death, intending to live there with her child, to whom she transferred all the wealth of devotion she had lavished on her husband. The child, however, had died when only 3 years old, and Aunt Agnes, as soon as she recovered sufficient strength, had left Alfalfa Ranch, intending never to visit the place again. All this had happened nearly 10 years ago, and the widow, relinquishing all the advantages her youth and beauty, quite as much as her wealth, could give her, had devoted herself to work amid the poor of New York. At my wedding, which she heartily approved, and where to a greater extent than ever before She cast off the almost morbid quietness which had grown habitual with her. She seemed particularly anxious that Jack and I should accept the loan of Alfalfa Ranch, apparently having an old idea that the power of our happiness would somehow lift the cloud of sorrow which in her mind brooded over the place. I had not been strong, and Jack was overjoyed at such an opportunity of taking me into the country. High as our expectations were, the beauty of the place far exceeded them all. What color! What glorious sunsets! And the long rides we took, seeming to be utterly tireless in that fresh, sweet air. One afternoon I sat on the veranda at the western wing of the house. The veranda here was broader than elsewhere, and it was reached only by a flight of steps leading up from the lawn on one side, and by a door opposite these steps that opened into Jack's study. The rest of this veranda was enclosed by a high railing, and by wire nettings so thickly overgrown with vines that the place was always very shady. I sat near the steps, where I could watch the sweep of the great shadows thrown by the clouds that were sailing before the west wind. Jack was inside, writing, and now and then he would say something to me through the open window. As I sat, lost in delight at the beauty of the view and the sweetness of the flower-scented air, I marveled that Aunt Agnes could ever have left so charming a spot. She must still love it, I thought, getting up to move my chair to where I might see still further over the prairies. And sometime she will come back. At this moment, I happened to glance to the further end of the veranda, and there I saw, to my amazement, a little child, seated on the floor, playing with the shifting shadows of the tangled creepers. It was a little girl, in a daintily embroidered white dress, with golden curls around her baby head. As I still gazed, she suddenly turned with a roguish toss of the yellow hair, and fixed her serious blue eyes on me. "Baby," I cried, "where did you come from? Where's your mamma, darling?" And I took a step towards her. "What's that, Sylvia?" called Jack from within. I turned my head and saw him sitting at his desk. "Come quick, Jack. There's the loveliest baby." I turned back to the child, looked, blinked, and at this moment Jack stepped out beside me. "Baby?" he inquired. "What on earth are you talking about, Sylvia dearest?" "Why, but," I exclaimed, "there was one. How did she get away? She was sitting right there when I called." "A baby?" repeated my husband. "My dear, babies don't appear and disappear like East Indian magicians. You have been napping, and are trying to conceal the shameful fact." "Jack," I said decisively, "don't you suppose I know a baby when I see one? She was sitting right there, playing with the shadows, and it's certainly very queer." Jack grinned. "Go and put on your habit," he replied. "The horses will be here in 10 minutes. And remember that when you have accounted for her disappearance, her presence still remains to be explained. Or perhaps you think Hua Sing produced her from his sleeve. I laughed. Hua Sing was our Chinese cook, and more apt, I thought, to put something up his sleeve than to take anything out. I suppose I was dreaming, I said, though I could almost as well believe I had only dreamed our marriage. Or rather, observed Jack, that our marriage had only dreamed us. Part 2. Shadows. About a week later I received a letter from Aunt Agnes. Among other things, chiefly relating to New York's slums, she said, "I am in need of rest, and if you and Jack could put up with me for a few days, I believe I should like to get back to the old place. As you know, I have always dreaded a return there, but lately I seem somehow to have lost that dread. I feel that the time has come for me to be there again, and I'm sure you will not mind me." Most assuredly we would not mind her. We sat in the moonlight that night on the veranda, Jack swinging my hammock slowly, and talked of Aunt Agnes. The moon silvered the waving alfalfa, and sifted through the twisted vines that fenced us in, throwing intricate and ever-changing patterns on the smooth flooring. There was a hum of insects in the air, and the soft wind ever and anon blew a fleecy cloud over the moon, dimming for a moment her serene splendor. "Who knows?" said Jack, lighting another cigar. "This may be a turning point in Aunt Agnes's life, and she may once more be something like the sunny, happy girl your mother describes. She is beautiful, and she is yet young. It may mean the beginning of a new life for her." "Yes," I answered. "It isn't right that her life should always be shadowed by that early sorrow. She is so lovely, and could be so happy. Now that she has taken the first step, there is no reason why she shouldn't go on." "We'll do what we can to help her," responded my husband. "Let me fix your cushions, darling. They have slipped." He rose to do so, and suddenly stood still, facing the further end of the veranda. His expression was so peculiar that I turned, following the direction of his eyes, even before his smothered exclamation of "Sylvia, look there!" reached me. Standing in the fluttering moonlight and shadows was the same little girl I had seen already. She still wore white, and her tangled curls floated, shining, around her head. She seemed to be smiling, and slightly shook her head at us. "What does it mean, Jack?" I whispered, slipping out of the hammock. "How did she get there? Come," said he, and we walked hastily towards the little thing, who again shook her head. Just at this moment, another cloud obscured the moon for a few seconds, and though in the uncertain twilight I fancied I still saw her, yet when the cloud passed, she was not to be found. Part 3. Perdita. Aunt Agnes certainly did look as though she needed rest. She seemed very frail, and the color had entirely left her face. But her curling hair was as golden as ever, and her figure as girlish and graceful. She kissed me tenderly, and kept my hand in hers, as she wandered over the house and took long looks across the prairie. "Isn't it beautiful?" she asked softly. "Just the place to be happy in. I've always had a strange fancy that I should be happy here again some day, and now I feel as though that day had almost come. You are happy, aren't you, dear?" I looked at Jack and felt the tears coming to my eyes. "Yes, I am happy. I did not know one could be so happy," I answered after a moment. Aunt Agnes smiled her sweet smile and kissed me again. "God bless you and your Jack. You almost make me feel young again." "As though you could possibly feel anything else," I retorted, laughing. "You little humbug, to pretend you're old." And, slipping my arm round her waist, for we had always been dear friends, I walked off to chat with her in her room. We took a ride that afternoon, for Aunt Agnes wanted another gallop over that glorious prairie. The exercise and the perfect afternoon brought back the color to her cheeks. "I think I shall be much better tomorrow," she observed as we trotted home. "What a country this is! And what horses!" slipping her hand down her mount's glossy neck. "I did right to come back here. I do not believe I will go away again." And she smiled on Jack and me, who laughed and said she would find it a difficult thing to attempt. We all three came out on the veranda to see the sunset. It was always a glorious sight, but this evening it was more than usually magnificent. Immense rays of pale blue and pink spread over the sky, and the clouds, which stretched in horizontal masses, glowed rose and golden. The whole sky was luminous and tender, and seemed to tremble with light. We sat silent, looking at the sky, and at the shadowy grass that seemed to meet it. Slowly the color deepened and faded. "There can never be a lovelier evening," said Aunt Agnes with a sigh. "Don't say that," replied Jack. "It is only the beginning of even more perfect ones." Aunt Agnes rose with a slight shiver. "It grows chilly when the sun goes," she murmured, and turned lingeringly to enter the house. Suddenly she gave a startled exclamation. Jack and I jumped up and looked at her. She stood with both hands pressed to her heart, looking. "The child again," said Jack in a low voice, laying his hand on my arm. He was right. There, in the gathering shadow, stood the little girl in the white dress. Her hands were stretched towards us, and her lips parted in a smile. A belated gleam of sunlight seemed to linger in her hair. "Perdita!" cried Aunt Agnes in a voice that shook with a kind of terrible joy. Then, with a stifled sob, she ran forward and sank before the baby, throwing her arms about her. The little girl leaned back her golden head and looked at Aunt Agnes with her great serious eyes. Then she flung both baby arms round her neck and lifted her sweet mouth. Jack and I turned away, looking at each other with tears in our eyes. A slight sound made us turn back. Aunt Agnes had fallen forward to the floor, and the child was nowhere to be seen. We rushed up, and Jack raised my aunt in his arms and carried her into the house. But she was quite dead. The little child we never saw again.